In February 2022, a Canadian truck driver had his bank account frozen simply for sending $50 to a crowdfunding campaign, without a trial, without explanation, with a click of a button. Now imagine, in 4 years' time, the government of any country on the planet will be able to do this to any of its citizens. My name is Mr. Dark Web, and this is not a conspiracy theory. It is an officially approved UN plan. This story did not begin with secret documents or leaks from the dark web. It began with a routine news headline that most people skimmed over without giving it a second thought. December 2024. The European Commission publishes another press release. Dry, bureaucratic language, lots of abbreviations, nothing interesting at first glance. But one sentence made me stop. By the end of the year 2026, each member state shall provide its citizens with a digital identification wallet. It is obliged to, not may, not is considering the possibility. It is obliged to. I started digging, and the deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. A picture that for some reason no one was talking about openly. A picture in which individual fragments, digital currencies, biometric databases, social rating systems came together to form something much greater than the sum of its parts. This investigation took almost a year. Hundreds of documents, dozens of sources, official reports from the UN, the World Bank, the European Central Bank, bills that have already been passed, systems that are already in place. And here's what's important to understand from the outset. Everything discussed in this video is not classified information. It's open data, official programs, public statements by officials. It's just that for some reason no one puts them together. To understand the scale of what is happening, we need to start with one figure, 1 billion. According to the World Bank, this is how many people on the planet do not have official identification. No passport, no birth certificate, nothing. For government systems, these people simply do not exist. They cannot open a bank account. They cannot officially get a job. They cannot receive medical care through insurance. They cannot vote. In a legal sense, they are ghosts. And this is where the United Nations comes in with its noble goal. The year is 2015. The UN adopts the so-called Sustainable Development Goals, 17 global tasks that humanity must accomplish by 2030, fighting poverty, clean water, quality education. It sounds wonderful. But among these goals, there is one that is discussed much less frequently. Target 16.9. Literally, ensure that by 2030, everyone has a legal identity, including birth registration. On paper, it's pure humanism. Give documents to those who don't have them. Include 1 billion invisible people in the global system. Give them access to banks, hospitals, schools. Who could possibly object? At first, I didn't see a problem here either, until I started to figure out what exactly is meant by legal identification in the year 2026. When officials from the UN, the World Bank, and technology corporations talk about digital identification, they don't just mean a passport photo on your phone. They talk about the so-called foundational system, foundational ID, a unified database that becomes the key to everything. How does it work? At birth, a person receives a unique digital identifier. Biometric data is linked to this identifier, including fingerprints, iris scans, and a three-dimensional model of the face. This data is stored in a centralized state database. This identifier then becomes the only way to confirm that you are who you say you are. Want to open a bank account? Scan your face. Want to get medical care? Scan your face. Want to buy a SIM card? Fingerprint. Want to cross the border? Iris scan. One key to all doors. Sounds convenient, doesn't it? No more stacks of documents. No more lost passports. No more queues at the MFC. Just touch your finger and you're done. That's exactly how they sell it. Convenience, safety, progress. But there is a nuance that people prefer not to talk about openly. If one key opens all doors, then whoever controls that key controls your access to everything. I would like to make an important reservation before proceeding. This investigation is not an assertion that digital identification will necessarily lead to totalitarianism. It is not a prophecy or a manifesto. This is an attempt to show that technology, which is presented to us exclusively as a blessing, has another side. A side that those who implement this technology prefer to keep quiet about. History teaches us one simple thing. Any instrument of control that can be used for oppression will sooner or later be used for that very purpose. Not because people are evil, but because power has a tendency to expand until it meets resistance. Can a digital ID remain just a convenient tool? Theoretically, yes. But let's look at what has already happened in countries where such systems have been implemented. Then everyone can draw their own conclusions. Right now, in January 2026, the world is at a point where you can still see the whole picture. In Russia, the digital ruble has been officially available for budget payments since 1st of January this year. In 7 months, the largest banks will be required to make it available to all customers. In 11 months, every country in the European Union must issue its citizens with a digital identification wallet. Banks, telecommunications companies, and large online platforms will be obliged to accept it. In India, the Aadhaar system already covers 1.3 billion people and is linked to bank accounts, taxes, and social benefits. In China, your social credit score determines whether you can buy a plane ticket. This is not the future. This is the present. Next, we will examine what exactly those who are building the system promise. What arguments do they put forward? Why do millions of people voluntarily submit their fingerprints and facial scans? Because before talking about the risks, we must honestly admit that digital identification has real advantages, and understand why so many people are willing to trade their privacy for convenience. And then we find out the possible price for this convenience. Before talking about the dark side, we must honestly admit that digital identification has real advantages, and the people who promote it are not sitting in dark rooms, rubbing their hands together. Most of them sincerely believe that they are making the world a better place. I spent several months studying official documents from the UN, the World Bank, and the European Commission. I read speeches by officials. I watched presentations at economic forums. And you know what? Their arguments sound convincing. Let's analyze them honestly, without sarcasm, without preconceived conclusions. The first argument is inclusiveness. 1 billion people on the planet do not exist for government systems. They have no documents. They cannot prove that they were born. They cannot prove that they are who they say they are. In sub-Saharan Africa, only 43% of children are registered at birth. In South Asia, the figure is 60%. These children grow up invisible. They cannot attend public school. They cannot receive vaccinations under the immunization program. They cannot claim social assistance. When they grow up, the situation does not improve. Without documents, it is impossible to work legally. It is impossible to start a business. It is impossible to own land. It is impossible to take out a loan. Digital identification solves this problem. No need for a building with archives. No need for an army of officials. All you need is a smartphone with a camera and an internet connection. Scanned your face, got your ID. Now you exist. The second argument is the fight against fraud. In India, before the introduction of the Aadhaar system, billions of dollars from social programs simply disappeared. Local officials created fictitious recipients. The same people received assistance several times using different names. Dead souls were listed as alive for decades. After the introduction of biometrics, this became impossible. Fingerprints cannot be forged. It is impossible to receive payment twice if the system recognizes that it is the same finger. The Indian government claims that Aadhaar has saved the budget $20 billion simply by eliminating fraud. $20 billion. That is money that now goes to real people rather than into the pockets of corrupt officials. The third argument is convenience. Remember the last time you stood in line for a certificate, when you carried a folder with documents from one office to another, when it turned out that you needed another copy, another stamp, another signature. Digital identification eliminates all of this. In Estonia, 99% of public services are available online. You can start a company in 15 minutes. Vote without leaving your home. Sign a contract from your smartphone. All you need is a digital signature linked to your ID. Estonians save approximately 5 working days per year simply by not having to visit government offices. Multiply that by the country's population, and you get enormous savings in time and resources. The fourth argument is safety. Paper documents are easy to forge. Passports can be bought on the black market. Stamps can be copied. Signatures can be imitated. Biometrics are almost impossible to fake. Your face is you. Your fingerprint is you. Your iris is you. No one can pretend to be you if the system checks your body instead of a piece of paper. This protects against identity theft, against bank card fraud, against forged documents at the border. I listened to these arguments and understood why millions of people voluntarily submit their biometric data. Why governments allocate billions to these systems. Why corporations are lining up to participate in projects. Everything looks perfect on paper. One ID for life. One key to all doors. No bureaucracy. No fraud. A world where every person is counted and protected. This is precisely what the official UN program, IDD, Identity for Development, promises. This is precisely what the World Bank is promoting by allocating grants for the introduction of biometric systems in developing countries. This is precisely what the European Union is building with its digital wallet project. And do you know what the problem is? That all these arguments are true. Digital identification really helps poor people obtain documents. It really reduces fraud. It really saves time. It really improves security. But there are things that are not mentioned in fancy presentations. Side effects that only become apparent after implementation. Risks that only become obvious once the system is already up and running. And to see them, there is no need to construct theories. It is enough to look at countries where digital identification has already become a reality. In India, where millions of people lost access to food due to a system failure. In Canada, where the government froze 200 bank accounts in 3 days belonging to people who had committed no crime. China, where 26 million people cannot buy a train ticket because the algorithm considers them insufficiently trustworthy. These are not hypothetical scenarios. This is what has already happened, documented, confirmed by official sources, and this is just the beginning. 14th of February, 2022. Ottawa, Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau activates the Emergencies Act for the first time in the country's history. The Emergencies Act is a tool that has never been used since its adoption in 1988. The reason is a protest by long-distance truck drivers, the so-called Freedom Convoy. Hundreds of lorries blocked the streets of the capital. Drivers protested against COVID restrictions and mandatory vaccination for crossing the border with the United States. The protest lasted almost 3 weeks. Noisy, inconvenient, annoying, but peaceful. Not a single act of violence, not a single broken window, not a single casualty. And this is what the government did. On 17 February, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland appeared before the press and announced that banks had been ordered to freeze the accounts of individuals associated with the protests, without a court order, without charges, without the right to defend themselves. I reread these words several times when I first came across them. Canada, not North Korea, not Iran, Canada, a country that for decades has been considered a model of liberal democracy. And now the country's finance minister calmly explains to journalists that the government can cut a person off from their own money. Just like that. Because it has decided that they are connected to the protests. What does connected mean? No one explained. Was it enough to send $50 to the crowdfunding campaign that was raising money for drivers? As it turned out, yes, it was enough. Was it enough to simply repost something in support of the protest? It is unknown. Was it enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? Perhaps. Within 10 days of the law coming into effect, banks froze 210 accounts. The total amount was almost 8 million Canadian dollars. It wasn't just the protest organizers who were affected. There were ordinary people who transferred small amounts through the GiveSendGo platform. There were joint account holders whose spouses made donations without their knowledge. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police provided the banks with lists of names. The banks obediently complied with the order. Not a single major bank publicly challenged the legality of what was happening. Not a single one sought a court ruling. The money simply vanished. It wasn't stolen. Formally, it still belonged to its owners. But it was impossible to use it. You couldn't pay for your flat. You couldn't buy food. You couldn't fill up your car. Imagine for a second. You wake up in the morning, go to the shop, swipe your card, declined. Try another card, declined. Open your bank app, your account is blocked. Call customer support. They tell you there's nothing they can do. The order came from above. You are not a criminal. You have not been charged. You have no opportunity to defend yourself in court. You are simply shut down. 10 days later, the law was repealed. Accounts were unfrozen. The government declared that everything had gone well. The protest had ended, and democracy had triumphed. But a precedent had been set. The world saw that in the 21st century, the state can press a button and a person ceases to exist economically. Without tanks in the streets, without arrests, without a single shot fired, just a click. The Canadian story is important because it happened in a country where no one expected anything like this. But it was a one-off action, an emergency measure, an exception. To see how digital identification works in everyday life, one need only look at India. The ADAR system was launched in 2010. The idea was simple and noble, to give every Indian citizen a unique 12-digit number linked to biometric data, 10 fingerprints, scans of both irises, a photograph of the face. By 2026, more than 1.3 billion people will be registered in the system. This is the largest biometric database in human history. At first, ADAR was voluntary. The government promised that no one would be forced to use it. It is simply a convenient tool. And then gradually, it became mandatory. Want to receive food subsidies? You need Aadhaar. Want to open a bank account? You need Aadhaar. Want to file your tax return? You need Aadhaar. Want to buy a SIM card? You need Aadhaar. Formally, the law still referred to voluntary participation. In reality, without Aadhaar, it became impossible to live a normal life. And that's when the problems began. The first problem is exclusion. Biometrics sounds reliable in theory. In practice, it fails. Construction workers who work with their hands all their lives have worn out fingerprints. The system does not recognize them. In older people, the iris of the eye changes with age. The system does not recognize them. In people with certain diseases, biometric data is unstable. The system does not recognize them. A study conducted in the state of Jharkhand showed that 49% of authentication attempts failed. 49%. This means that almost half of the people were unable to confirm their identity on the first attempt. Now imagine that this authentication determines whether you will receive your food ration. Imagine a queue at a state-run shop. You hold your finger up to the scanner. The scanner flashes red. You try another finger. Red again. You are told, the system does not recognize you. Come back tomorrow. But tomorrow it will be the same. And the day after tomorrow. In 2017, journalists documented cases where people died of starvation because they could not pass biometric verification. Not because they were not entitled to assistance. Not because they were trying to cheat the system. Simply because the machine did not recognize them. The second problem is leaks. In January 2018, a journalist from the Indian newspaper Tribune conducted an experiment. He found someone on WhatsApp who, for 500 rupees, less than $7, sold him access to the Aadhaar portal. By entering any number, a journalist could see everything: name, address, photograph, telephone number, linked bank account. The data of 1 billion people was accessible to anyone with $7. How was this possible? It later emerged that more than 100,000 former employees of the Ministry of Information Technology retained access to the system after leaving their jobs. 100,000 people who could access the database and do whatever they wanted with the data. The government's response? They sued the journalist. Not those who leaked the information, but the one who reported it. Later, there were other leaks. In 2017, data on 130 million people was leaked from government websites. In 2023, the largest leak in the country's history occurred when the personal data of 800 million people appeared for sale on the dark web for $80,000. And here is what is critically important to understand. Biometric data cannot be replaced. If your password is stolen, you can create a new one. If your credit card number is stolen, the bank will issue you a new one. But if your fingerprint, iris scan, or facial model is stolen, it's gone forever. You can't grow new fingers. You can't change your eyes. Every biometric data leak is an irreversible disaster for everyone affected. India has shown the world both sides of digital identification. Yes, the system has helped millions of people obtain documents. Yes, it has reduced fraud in social programs. But it has also excluded the most vulnerable, those whose bodies do not fit into the algorithms. And it has created the largest reservoir of personal data in history, which is impossible to protect. Canada has demonstrated that a democratic government can and will use the financial system as a weapon against its own citizens. India has demonstrated that a centralized biometric database is not a safe, but a target. But these were all separate elements, fragments, problems that could be attributed to implementation errors, shortcomings, or exceptional circumstances. To see how all these elements work together as a single machine, you need to look at the country that has gone furthest, to a country where digital identification has already merged with social rating, financial control, and total surveillance, to China. When Western journalists write about China, they like to use the word Orwellian. Cameras on every corner, facial recognition, a social rating system that determines whether you are worthy of buying a plane ticket. It sounds like a dystopia. It sounds like something distant, alien, impossible in normal countries. But when I began to look into the details, the picture turned out to be more complicated and, in a sense, more frightening. Because the Chinese system is not the madness of a dictator. It is a rational, well-thought-out architecture, and that is precisely why it is so easy to copy. Let's start with what in the West is called social credit. Most people imagine a single score, like in a video game. Do something good, plus 10 points. Cross the road in the wrong place, -5. If you don't score enough points, you won't be allowed on the plane. The reality is different. There is no single national ranking system with points. There are many parallel systems that operate in different areas. There is a financial blacklist for those who do not pay court judgments. There are transport restrictions for those who have violated rules on railways or aeroplanes. There are corporate ratings for companies that do not fulfill contracts or violate regulations. These systems are not combined into a single social score, but they are interconnected, and the consequences of falling into any of them are very real. Here are the figures I found in official Chinese sources. By 2019, the latest public data available, the system had blocked more than 17 million attempts to purchase airline tickets, and more than 5 million attempts to purchase tickets for high-speed trains, 22 million rejections in 1 year. No arrests, no fines. Just, you can't. The system has decided that you're not allowed to. Who are these people? Mostly debtors subject to court rulings. Those who have not paid their loans, failed to fulfill contracts, lost court cases, and failed to compensate for damages. Formally, this sounds reasonable. If you don't pay your debts, you face restrictions. But there is a nuance. The decision is not made by a human being. The decision is made by an algorithm based on data in the database. If the data is incorrect, and it can be incorrect, you only find out when you try to buy a ticket. And then the quest begins. To prove to the system that you are not who it thinks you are. A journalist from Foreign Policy described the case of a businessman who was unable to fly for 2 years because someone with the same surname had not paid off a loan. 2 years, dozens of appeals, tons of paperwork, and all this time the algorithm was convinced that he was a debtor. But transport restrictions are only the visible part. The real strength of the Chinese system lies in integration. Every resident of China has an identification number linked to everything. Bank accounts, telephone, medical records, purchase history, movements. Facial recognition cameras are installed everywhere. On the streets, in the underground, in residential complexes, in schools. The system knows where you are, who you meet, what you buy, where you go, what you write about on the internet, and this information is available to the state in real time. During the COVID lockdowns, the world saw how this works in practice. The Health Code app tracked everyone's movements. Green code, you can go wherever you want. Yellow, restrictions. Red, quarantine, you cannot leave your home. The code changed automatically. If you were near someone who was infected, you turned yellow. If you visited a dangerous area, you turned red. No warning, no explanation. You just opened the app in the morning, and you were already under house arrest. There were documented cases where the code turned red for people who were planning to travel to Beijing to protest. They were not ill. They had not been in contact with infected individuals. But the system decided that it would be better for them to stay at home. This is not a conspiracy theory. Chinese officials themselves have acknowledged this, although they called it a mistake and the independent action of local authorities. I am not talking about China to say, look how bad they are. I am talking about it to show the architecture, the principle of operation. Because this architecture is not a unique Chinese development. It is being built right now, in Russia, in Europe, everywhere. The names are different, the rhetoric is different, but the elements are the same. Uniform digital identification, biometric database, programmable money, automatic enforcement of restrictions. Russia is a good example of how this system is being built in real time. The Unified Biometric System, UBS, was launched in 2018. Initially, it was an experiment for banks. Submit your face and voice, and you will be able to open accounts without visiting a branch. By July 2025, approximately 7 million people had voluntarily registered in the system. In addition, banks had transferred 76 million biometric samples from their databases to the system. From 1 January 2025, EBS became mandatory for foreigners purchasing SIM cards. If you want communication, you have to show your face. For Russian citizens, the system remains voluntary for now. The digital ruble is developing in parallel. From 1 October 2025, digital rubles will be used to pay certain social benefits. From 1 January 2026, they will be used for any federal payments at the recipient's discretion. From September this year, the largest banks will be required to provide all customers with the ability to conduct transactions using digital rubles. What is the digital ruble, and how does it differ from conventional cashless money? The ordinary money in your account is an entry in a commercial bank's database. The bank may be an intermediary, but it is your relationship with the bank. The digital ruble is a record in the central bank's database. Directly, without intermediaries. The state sees every transaction in real time. And, critically, digital money can be programmed. You can set an expiry date. Spend by the end of the month, otherwise they will burn. You can set geography. They only work in your region. You can set categories. Only for food, only for medicines, only for approved goods. It is possible, and this is no longer just theory, to block a specific person's ability to spend money instantly, automatically, based on a signal from the database. The Central Bank of Russia officially states that no such restrictions are planned, that the digital ruble is simply another form of money, convenient, modern, secure. Perhaps that will be the case, but architecture allows for something else. Europe is building its own version. The EIDAS 2.0 regulation requires all European Union countries to issue digital identification wallets to citizens by the end of 2026. By December 2027, banks, telecommunications companies, and large online platforms will be required to accept them. At the same time, the European Central Bank is developing a digital euro. A pilot project has been launched. Mass implementation is planned in the coming years. Official rhetoric, convenience, security, combating money laundering, but the mechanism is the same. Unique identifier, biometrics, programmable money, the ability to instantly disconnect a person from the system. I am not saying that Europe or Russia will become China. I am not saying that governments will necessarily use these tools for repression. I say otherwise. Once a tool has been created, it will be used. Perhaps not immediately, perhaps not by the government that created it, but sooner or later, it will definitely be used. Canada proved this in 2022. The question is not whether they will abuse it. The question is that we are building a world where abuse becomes technically possible at the touch of a button. And that brings me to the final question that has been troubling me since the beginning of this investigation. What can we do about it? And can we do anything at all? January 2026. I am sitting in front of my monitor, trying to piece together everything I have learned during a year of investigation. And do you know what scares me the most? Not China with its cameras, not India with its leaks, not Canada with its frozen accounts. It frightens me how quickly all this has become normal. Take a look at the calendar for the coming months. September 2026. Russia's largest banks are required to provide all customers with the ability to conduct transactions using the digital ruble, not sometime in the distant future, in 8 months. December 2026. Every EU country is required to issue digital identification wallets to its citizens in 11 months. December 2027. European banks and major online platforms are required to accept this wallet in 2 years' time. These are not projects, not plans, not discussions. These are laws that have been passed with specific dates. And here's what's interesting. Almost no one talks about it. I spoke with dozens of people while preparing this material. Smart, educated people. Most had no idea that in a year's time their digital identity would be stored in a single state database, that their money would become programmable, that every transaction would be visible in real time. When I explained, they shrugged. So what? I have nothing to hide. This is the argument I heard most often. I have nothing to hide. I am not a criminal. Let them watch me if they want to. And I understand that logic. I really do. If you are an ordinary person who goes to work, pays taxes, and does not break the law, why should you be afraid of transparency? Let the state see your purchases. Let it know where you are. What difference does it make? The problem is that nothing to hide only works until the rules change. Canadian truckers also believed they had nothing to hide. They did not rob banks. They did not finance terrorism. They were simply protesting, which is a constitutional right in any democracy. And then the rules changed. And those who had nothing to hide discovered that their $50 donation was sufficient reason to cut them off from their own money. Indian farmers also thought they had nothing to hide. They simply wanted to receive the rice they were entitled to by law. And then it turned out that their fingers, worn down from work, were reason enough to deny them food. Nothing to hide is not a defense. It is an illusion of control in a world where you do not make the rules. I am not calling for panic. I am not calling for people to flee to the forest and live without documents. That is impossible and pointless. But I want you to understand the deal you are entering into. Every time you submit your biometric data for convenience, you give away a part of yourself that cannot be recovered. Every time you agree to a single key to all doors, you agree that someone else can take that key away. Every time you choose convenience over privacy, you are voting for a world where privacy does not exist. It's your choice. I cannot and will not make it for you. But I want it to be a conscious choice. I want you to understand what is on the other side of the scales. Convenience does not come for free. It has a price. And that price is the possibility of ending up on the other side of the system at any moment. Do you know what one person I spoke to while preparing this material told me? a former bank employee who saw how these systems work from the inside. He said, "The problem isn't that the government wants to control you. The problem is that one day it will be able to, and then it won't matter whether it wants to or not. The ability creates the temptation. The temptation creates the use. It's just a matter of time." I have thought a lot about these words. The history of humanity is the history of tools that were created for one purpose, but used for another. Dynamite was invented for mining. The internet was invented for military communications. Nuclear energy was supposed to provide the world with cheap electricity. Every time we told ourselves, this will only be used for good, every time it turned out that the tool had a life of its own. Digital identification is the most powerful control tool that has ever existed. More powerful than the army, more powerful than the police, more powerful than any secret service in history, because it is invisible, because it works automatically, because it does not require violence, only disconnection. We are building this tool right now, with our own hands, with our own consent, with our own indifference. Perhaps it will never be used against us. Perhaps governments will prove wiser and more restrained than any governments in history before them, maybe. But if not, there will be no turning back. My name is Mr. Darkweb. I don't know how this story will end. No one does. But now you know that it has begun. And the choice, whether to do something with this knowledge, remains yours.